Yeah, we have the quorum, we're gonna have, Dave is,
Yeah.
Green light's on. so
Old
that-
rules, you had to have the quorum in the room, but I don't think that applies yet
If the green
anymore.
light's on, is
no, not until April.
Yeah.
yeah, green, yeah, you're
Oh,
recording now.
I think
Yeah,
maybe
so
we're
all
good.
set, yeah.
We're good. All right, so this is the planning board meeting for Tuesday, March 8th, 2022. I'd like to call this meeting to order. According to Massachusetts law, anyone who intends to record the meeting must first notify the chair, will then inform the other attendees at the start of the meeting. Looks like there's nobody's going to be recording it, at least in person here. Would you all join me in a pledge of allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America,
the United States of America,
which is
and to the republic for which stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We'll now open the public meeting portion of the planning board with PB 2019-43, a covenant release for number 3 Elijah's Woods in East Harwich, Plan 630-62, Lot 1. Mr. Eidman.
Yeah, we don't have any representative from Eastward here.
Right.
But it's an administrative matter, I don't think they really need to attend. This is a development or subdivision now called Elijah's Woods. When approved, it was called Strawberry Hill Lane, and there's a subsidiary roadway also called Lucy's Lane, which is still called Lucy's Lane. It's basically, it's up in East Harwich, basically between Chris Joe Beth and Partridge, I guess it is, on the east side of 137. They started kind of developing the subdivision several months ago. They've now put the road in, the finish coat isn't in, but basically the road is in. They've asked for a release from Lot 1. There are 10 total subdivision lots. So some of the things we have to look at when someone asks for a release is there sufficient security to ensure that the developer will finish all the required work, the subdivision road, the drainage. I think in this case, certainly there is. There are 9 lots you'd still be holding in security by way of the covenant. And number 2, is the road done sufficiently so there's adequate access to the property? Lot 1 is it's kind of at the intersection of 137 and this new road, so there's certainly adequate access to get in and do building if this lot were to be conveyed at this point. So I have no problems with the planning board releasing Lot 1 as requested. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have about that.
Do we have any questions?
I just have a question.
Sure.
Not relative to the vote, but is there sewer already coming up this new street, Elijah's? Does anybody know? I'm just curious.
Yeah, that's, it's a touchy subject. There certainly is sewer in East Harwich.
Yeah,
Whether
it's up 137.
Now, I believe this is one of the subdivisions that kind of is proposed to hook up to the sewer, and that there was planned allocation for.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think it will be connected to sewer.
Similar to.
And he has a surge in. He has his surge in there
For the.
for the
all
subdivision,
lot.
yeah.
Okay,
He's got to do is hook up to the main line.
cool. Thank you.
Sure.
So I'd make a motion if we're ready. So I make a motion that we vote to release Lot 1 from the existing covenant for Elijah's Woods subdivision at Route 137 in East Harwich,
A
in
motion-
accordance with the memo from the planning director dated March 2nd, 2022.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? We'll take a roll call vote. Mr. Harris?
David Harrison, aye.
Mr. Chadwick?
Craig Chadwick, aye.
Ms. Maslowski?
Mary Maslowski, aye.
Mr. Stoltz?
Bill Stoltz, aye.
Duncan Berry, aye. We're set with that.
Duncan, can I just, we don't have to do it now, but before you leave tonight, can I catch up with you to sign the covenant release?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. We'd now like to welcome Sarah Corja from the Cape Cod Commission to discuss the workshop review currently for the current version of the West Harwich Special District Design Guidelines that we received in our packets. Thank you for joining us, Sarah. Look forward to hearing what you have for us this evening.
Great, thank you very much for having me. And I'm Sarah Korjeff, Historic Preservation Specialist and Planner with the Cape Cod Commission staff. And I should note that my colleague Liz Kellum is also available tonight. And I guess our goal today is to walk through the draft West Harwich Special District Design Guidelines and find out from you whether you'd like us to make any changes to them or whether you have any questions or comments in general before we move on forward towards creating a final version. Let's see, I know you received copies. I am going to share a presentation just so that it's a little easier to talk through the different elements of the guidelines. So if you can hold on for just a moment, I will share my screen. Let's see. And all right, let's see if that's working. Works.
You were
Are you
sharing
seeing
a
a
minute
blank
ago.
screen? Let's see. Options. That looks.
That's promising.
My apologies. I have not done this before, and it's a little bit clunky. Let's see.
You had it before.
Was it up?
Yep.
It was.
Oh, it was really. What? And you could actually see it. I apologize because on my screen it was showing as all black.
Now we have all black.
All right. Let's.
I have all black too.
Okay. I am going to stop sharing and try again. My apologies. Been on 3 different media for meetings today. Let's see. I wonder why that.
Are we doing go-to-meeting?
That's what this is.
Figures.
We need one format to rule them all.
Can't we have a fourth? Come on.
Forget monopolies.
We're moving to Teams.
Teams is so 2020 though. Oh my God.
From Zoom.
So I'm trying to reload my presentation in hopes that that was the problem. Okay. Now. Okay, now let's try one more time. And we're going to go for that one. Share. Okay.
There we
There
go.
we go.
Can you see it? Excellent. All right. Thank you for your patience. All right. So I'm going to walk through, this is the draft design guidelines for the West Harwich Special District. And let's see if I can make sure this moves forward. All right. Now my problem is moving it to the next slide. Goodness. Working.
How about a right arrow?
Yeah, I'm looking for that on.
Can you try just hitting the right arrow on your computer?
Yeah, and it's not doing anything. Shoot.
How about right-clicking on your mouse?
There's an interesting idea. Thank you, Mary. That's exactly what I needed.
Yeah.
All right, awesome. Okay, so the design guidelines begin with an introduction and purpose statement. Introduction, obviously commenting on the fact that these design guidelines are meant to be a companion to the West Harwich Special District zoning bylaw. that was adopted in fall 2020, and stating that the purpose really is to describe the best design practices for development in the West Harwich Special District. It also includes a historical narrative that tells a little bit about the background of the district, the historical background, and also includes some great old photographs, like this pair here showing the Captain Park House in current day as well as in its. And then it jumps right into the guidelines themselves. And the design guidelines are divided into two distinct sections. The first that deals specifically with historic structure guidelines, and the second dealing with guidelines for new construction. And I'll walk through all 8 of those for each of those sections. So under historic structure guidelines, the first is reuse historic structures. And there really the idea is to encourage folks to incorporate historic buildings into any new development within West Harwich. And specifically, we're not talking about replicating historic buildings, but instead preserving the actual historic structure, because it's the original materials and the actual construction technology used that is significant, as well as the architectural detailing and the look of the building. So this guideline makes that explicit. And it shows 2 examples of buildings within the West Harwich district that have new uses in them. One on the left, designed originally as a residence, but has actually changed use multiple times throughout its history, but retained its form. And the one on the right, originally as a barn. The house that it belonged to no longer exists, but the barn has successfully been reused and retained all of its architectural features. The second guideline, preserving original forms and details, really talks primarily about keeping original roof form and building massings, as well as architectural detailing and configuration of doors and windows. All of these things are the things that make these historic buildings significant and make them a product of their time. This guideline talks in particular about preserving the primary facade of a building, which in many cases is going to be the street-facing facade, often the most highly decorated and the most unique. Again, we have 2 examples here of well-preserved buildings. One that on the right that actually has a later addition to allow it some commercial use, but the one on the left still serving as a residential structure. The third guideline focuses on the importance of placing additions to the rear of historic buildings. And that's a way of allowing expansion of historic structures to accommodate either new uses or greater sort of enlarged uses without having a significant negative impact on the historic structure. And this illustration shows an existing building sort of in a white ghosted form and potential new construction in a yellow color, showing that you could have a small addition located to the rear, or you could use a small addition on the rear of the building to actually help you connect to an even larger addition further back.
Sarah, do you want comments as you go through this, or are we going to go back through it in detail?
You tell me what you'd prefer, actually.
I'm sorry, say again?
I guess I'm willing to go either way, whatever the board would prefer.
I think it's probably best for you to go through the whole thing and then we go back and get into the weeds.
Okay, great. I'll continue on then. All right. So the fourth guideline, respect to building evolution, recognizes that very many of the historic properties we have evolved significantly over time already, and have multiple additions to them, as seen in this example on the left, but also it's very visible when looked from the aerial view at this portion of West Harwich, where you can see almost every structure has a number of additions placed to the rear of it. These are all historic buildings, and they've been expanded and grown over time and still retain their historic significance. And so we really want that evolution to be able to continue, which means preserving the original building and some of its earliest additions that have gained significance. All right. Guideline number 5 talks about keeping historic buildings prominent. And this really goes hand in hand with the prior guidelines, the idea of placing any significantly sized additions to the rear or to the rear of the lot or to the rear of the building so that the historic structure still remains prominent. That's an important part of preserving the streetscape within West Harwich. And again, we have 2 examples, one from West Harwich and on the left, and one from Dennis, actually on the right, but both of them with historic structures that have additions placed to the rear. And then on the left in particular, a larger scale addition placed well enough to the rear that even though it's significantly larger than the historic building, its placement further back still allows the historic structure to remain prominent when viewed from the streetscape. Guideline number 6 talks about designing compatible additions. So the idea of compatibility really has 2 elements. One is that the additions would not significantly harm the historic structure, that they wouldn't overwhelm it. So placing them set back to the sides or to the rear, or even set back on the roof slope are all possibilities for compatible additions. Also, the scale of them so that they don't overwhelm the historic structure, and the idea of continuing existing roof forms and such on any additions so that they are of the same family, if you will, as the historic structure. So here, this illustration again uses the sort of ghosted version of the historic building, and then the yellow additions, the yellow sections showing potential compatible additions that could be made, and then a photo illustration from Harwich Port as a Guideline 7 talks about repairing rather than replacing historic features whenever possible. This is a very basic tenet in sort of historic preservation practice, recognizing that the original materials used in many of these architectural details has a great deal of added rot resistance and strength because it's harvested from early growth trees and has a much denser sort of development in the wood. Also recognize that the craftsmanship that goes into many of these details is important to preserve. So whenever possible, they should be repaired rather than replaced. 2 examples, again, one from the left from West Harwich, one on the right from the town of Orleans. Guideline 8, make changes reversible. And this is the final guideline in the historic structure section, but this is really another basic tenet in historic preservation practice. The idea that if you add on to a historic structure, you want to do it in such a way that in the future it could potentially be removed or changed without further harming the historic building, without requiring the removal of a lot of original material, a lot of any historic features. And so this illustration really shows how these sort of yellow additions, which you saw a few guidelines earlier in the compatible additions guideline, could actually be sort of pulled away and would not have significantly impacted the historic structure. All right. And then we move on to the second section, the new construction guidelines. And here we begin with the guideline of orient buildings to the street. Here you can see sort of a segment that's meant to illustrate a section of the West Harwich Special District with existing buildings shown in sort of the white ghosted structures. And those are all based on historic buildings in West Harwich. And then potential new construction shown in sort of the orangey yellow color, outlined in ways that seem like they are appropriate to the West Harwich district. And so here, all of these new structures are shown facing this, with their front entry facing the street and the front access facing the street, and concealing parking to the rear of the lot, or at least to the rear of those buildings that are facing the street. Second guideline for new construction is to follow established setback patterns. And here you can see along the front of all of these lots is sort of a yellowish area that represents the building setback of 20 to 40 feet, which is the dimensional requirement in West Harwich Special District. And here it shows how that is the setback range of existing buildings in the district, or at least in this section. And so any new construction would also have to locate their building within that setback range. The third guideline talks about using landscape to define the street edge, acknowledging that in West Harwich, there's a very distinctive pattern of having the buildings close to the street, but when there are yards in the front, they are very often defined by either fences or hedges or other landscape elements. So here, these are two examples recommending that any new construction use this type of detailing in order to be compatible with the district and sort of continue the established patterns of historic structures with hedges, rows of plantings, or a little picket fence. Guideline 4 talks about massing and articulation. So the scale of the building and how it's broken down into smaller masses. Here we have a photo illustration from Harwich Center of a larger commercial building that has actually been broken down successfully into smaller components by breaking it into multiple sort of gable end sections that are facing the street, by pulling the second floor back further from the street edge than the first floor structure. Also, just in the graphic illustrations, talking about the roof pitch of historic buildings needing to be essentially copied in the roof form of any new structures. Also acknowledging that in the West Harwich Special District, there's a maximum building facade length of 50 feet. And so, and that any additional building facades would need to be stepped back at least 10 feet from the street-facing facade, the most prominent street-facing facade. Here's an example of a historic structure on the left, and then the new construction on the right that would meet those requirements of the facade being under 50 feet in length, and then a setback of at least 10 feet to the side L of that structure. Okay. Guideline 5 talks about scale and proportion of of new structures, again, using some existing historic buildings as sort of a way of measuring what the appropriate scale and proportion of construction would be. Again, acknowledging some of the details in the West Harwich Special District dimensional regulations, limiting building height to 2.5 stories, not to exceed 30 feet. Identifying the maximum building footprint of 2,000 square feet for street-facing buildings. And also identifying varying ways that you might be able to make building scale compatible with the surrounding context on new construction through some techniques such as breaking down the building into multiple components, a main mass and a side L, using low eave heights on some portions of the structure, such as over porch, or also adding porches and making changes in the roof form, as here you can see with a gable front on the main mass and then a side gable for the L addition. And again, I guess a photo example from the town of Brewster that acknowledges another example of a building that's broken into different mass porch additions to help bring down the scale of it. Guideline 6 talks about facade design. This is really the arrangement of doors and windows and masonries on the facade, and acknowledging the fact that historic structures really have a very familiar arrangement of doors and windows, and sort of percentage of the facade that's occupied by doors and windows, and making sure that we carry that into the new structures that are proposed in the district, with looking at the window proportions of existing structures and the arrangement of doors and windows, and trying to carry that forward. And an example from the town of Chatham in the photograph there. Okay, getting close to the end. Guideline 7 talks about facade materials, acknowledging that it's exterior building materials that really are an important way of carrying forward the traditions in architecture in West Harwich. So using traditional siding materials such as wood clapboard and wood shingles, also high quality roofing materials and colors that are recognizable in the district and sort of emulate the traditional pattern palette that's there. And here we have an example from Dennis on the left and Harwich Port on the right, where you can see some varied materials used on the same buildings, clapboard siding, shingle siding, and varied roof materials. And finally, Guideline 8 in the new construction section, talking about windows and particularly window patterns and the percentage of window sort of transparent on any new construction, particularly for commercial buildings. And so we're talking about within the West Harwich Special District, commercial buildings should not exceed 70% of windows on the ground floor facade facing Route 28, and not exceed 30% on the those areas facing secondary streets. Upper story windows should conform to the existing residential pattern of the neighboring structures. And again, here the ghosted sort of white illustration, based on a historic structure in West Harwich, and then the two orangey yellow illustrations on the bottom of the page are meant to represent new construction that would be compatible and following these guidelines in terms of the amount of window and the configurations of windows. All right. And with that, that is the end of the walkthrough of the guidelines themselves. But I would be happy to back up to any particular page or take any comments. We're very interested in hearing what you think of the graphic illustrations, whether they do a good enough job of actually conveying the information we're trying to convey, and also what you think of the photo illustrations that were chosen to demonstrate some of these guidelines.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Dave, did you want to initiate some comments, or do we have any other comments?
Yeah, I have several comments. First of all, Sarah, I think this is a terrific job.
Is there any way to get them to talk about
Wonderful examples, clear narrative. So any comments I have are certainly not intended to imply that it's not. On page 7, if you can take us to page 7.
That's the place additions to the rear, right?
No, this is Guideline 3 I'm talking
Oh.
about.
Yes, okay, guideline 3. Guideline 3 in the historic guidelines. There we go, is that it?
Yeah, the illustration on the bottom. It's also used on Guideline 5 where it works a lot better, but this is, I gotta say, this is kind of an unfortunate photograph. The building in the back is certainly not a good example of something that's compatible with the historic architecture. And the signs in front really detract from the example. So I think it gets the point across, but it's, I think it could be done and be giving a much better example.
Okay,
I wanted to second that because I had written that down. I think there are a couple of, I think we can grab some better images than the Google Street View images. I mean, I'd be happy to volunteer and send some out to you.
Yeah, that piece
that's
of
great,
property
I'd
back on-
appreciate that. I should have mentioned also that we've used a number of Google Street View images here, and the idea was that if you were comfortable with the example, that we would go out and actually take better photographs or ask you to take photographs. But these were meant just to be a talking point, I guess. Find out whether you like the example or
Like a
not.
placeholder,
and I
right.
agree. Given this one's in more than one place, it makes sense to find another example.
Mr. Chair, could I throw in one comment here?
Yeah, yeah.
The thing I like about this is, I mean, are we aiming for the quintessential or ideal example? Or are we aiming for something that might exist in the district that isn't the perfect ideal situation we would ever see, but, you know, might be a practical example of what we're talking about? I don't know, so it's something to consider. As I'm a pragmatist, and I'm more interested in how one might use these to actually do development in the district.
Right.
Not how do you develop the ideal project in the West Harwich district. So it might just be something to consider, you know, going forward.
I wanted to point out that on that piece of property, that red part of that addition is the original barn.
Is that right? Yep.
Yeah, they put a little porch in the front, but that was the original barn.
And which page?
That's right. That's page 7. That is actually the,
Little antique shop or whatever it was.
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
I mean, there
That's
could be a
actually-
better picture, but
Yeah.
Right. But this is one of the captain's homes from the 1897 trip around Cape Cod. So, and it's documented, so it's actually been altered a little bit, but you're right. Did you have anything else, Dave?
Yeah, I got several. Do you want me to go through all of mine, or do you want to go?
Well,
page by
this is
page?
what I was going to say, is because I have a few kind of textual recommendations. I'm wondering whether it would be more helpful for us to do like a round robin email where perhaps via Elaine, we could kind of collate
Sure.
a single document that then we could transfer to Sarah with our concerns kind of broken down by author or whatever. That way, you know, and just save this evening's responses to kind of general observations like what you were saying, ideal versus real. And I think Dave Harris's point about, which was clarified about Google Street Images versus kind of a custom photograph, that makes sense. I'm wondering too, if there are examples that we could think about pulling that are going to be perhaps more germane, to your point, to actual buildings, instead of drawing on, let's say, the image from Dennis on page 9, which we could actually use something from Harwich Port that's just a couple of miles away that illustrates the exact same point with something in town. So the more that we can emphasize town or even village examples. The same goes for repair rather than replace. I mean, the Orleans building is great, but guess what? We have a 1740s Cape House right there on 28 at the old, what's now Noble House, that makes the same point with the same windows. And again, I think to Jonathan's point, that might be important to consider. Also, I wanted to ask you whether there was a desire to boycott illustrating Bishop's Terrace, the Job Chase Senior House. Because this Guideline 8 for historic structures, make changes reversible, they have kind of an atrium, it's a 1780 hip-roofed colonial, okay, kind of a Federalist building. And they put on like an atrium style, like just a glass, two-sided glass box, probably in the mid-1950s. That could just be lifted off and you'd have, just exactly what you're talking about. It's almost like a module. I'm wondering whether or not that could be discussed with kind of an outline and, or is that, are we gonna like not touch that one because it's kind of a preservationist catastrophe?
It meets some of the elements, but not all of them, because that glass building where I remember having dinners in there,
Right.
being younger, I mean, it doesn't meet some of the tenets that the guidelines. That
Right,
is
but
set
as a
out.
reversible thing.
Correct, so it meets some of them. That's why, I would rather be more real about this, not that every building's gonna represent the ideal, but there are certain aspects of buildings, like the reversibility
Right.
with the Job Chase Senior House, great. Other aspects, you put in kind of an incompatible addition on there, but there are some things you have to live with. It also reminds us that these guidelines are best design practices, but these aren't going to allow the planning board to go out there and all of a sudden do design review, because
Correct,
frankly, it's
right.
not in the zoning today. There are
Right.
certain design aspects that are, but it doesn't become an historic district with that
Right.
same level of review.
Right.
Because it's not an historic district.
Right.
Yeah. Sarah, I have a comment on Guideline 7, repair rather than replace.
Mm-hmm.
And the photograph shows a classic example of an environmental hazard of lead-based paint. And obviously, in many of these old homes, in the interior, if there's ductwork, it's probably wrapped with asbestos paper, and pipes are wrapped with asbestos insulation. And would it make sense to mention that in the narrative as a potential hazard that should be looked out for? And also, HUD back in the 80s, HUD put together a series of rehab guidelines. You may have heard of them, Sarah, although you're probably too young. They had some really good information about how to repair old windows, doors, trim work, and things like that. So it really honors and replaces and repairs the things that make these old buildings as unique as they are. I don't know that they're being republished by somebody, but if they are, they would be a great reference. And I'm going to try to find that if there are, with my contacts in DC.
I
Thanks,
think
Dave.
it would be possible, this would be something for the board to consider. We could add some links or some references, either to the back of the document or to specific guidelines, if you think that's appropriate. I'm not sure where I would fall on the idea of mentioning potential hazards,
Right.
because I'd be a little afraid that by singling out just a few, that it makes it sound like that we might find that we're missing some others, and we're really intending to focus on the idea.
Yeah, once you open that can of worms, you really better be complete, huh?
You may argue against the guideline too whatever has to be done as a matter of law has to be done as a matter of law, but it may undercut the guideline
Right.
by saying the cost of the remediation is greater than, at least
value
the
of the-
economic value of the building or the feature, so.
That's a decision that an individual developer is going to decide when they're coming before you for the project anyway.
Well, it probably is even outside your jurisdiction.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Building inspector also.
Well, I'd like to just say on a general level, I think it's a beautifully illustrated and very elegantly composed and simple to understand document that should encourage the kind of practices that we're looking for. And I think you all have done a fantastic job. I know if we do have more edits, I mean, like I've got some small kind of like editorial comments about word choice and what have you that we can work around, and some other image ideas that might fit in or buttress an argument. I'm just not going to burden you with going through them without having either textual or visual support. But my hat's off. It's really a fine document. And what is our next step with this after we go through another iteration or so?
Well, I think that's up to you. Ultimately, this has to go to a public, in order to adopt these regulations and for the planning board to promulgate them as regulations, it has to go to a public hearing.
So we have a we can schedule, once we get like kind of bulletproof copy for internal use, subject it to public hearing,
Yeah.
announce it, and then conduct it. Is this something that we can have, let's say, you think early September kind of a thing, or late fall, late spring before, I mean, do we have any meetings scheduled in June and July?
Yeah, I mean, we normally have planning board hearings.
'Cause I don't have anything in my calendar, so.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, there are planning board meetings in
Right.
June and July. In my opinion, this is very close. I mean, we can choose different pictures and such,
Right.
and there's nothing inappropriate about you sending, textual or other suggestions to me. I'll collate them.
Okay.
And send them to Sarah. But this will all be subject to, public process
Right.
through a public hearing, so. But I think this is, very.
Jonathan, I'm confused. I'm confused, Jonathan. I thought this guideline did not have to go through the public hearing.
It has to go through a public hearing. It doesn't have to be approved by town meeting.
Okay,
Yeah.
so is it the Board of Selectmen that approve it, or how's it?
No,
work?
the planning board does. The planning board holds a hearing and votes to adopt it as a regulation.
Okay.
And then after the adoption, we publish that it's been adopted to promulgate it, and after that, it's effective.
But you referred to it as a regulation. I thought it was a guideline.
Well, it essentially functions as a regulation.
Oh, okay.
You can call it guidelines, but
Thank you.
there is some force of law to it. Not the same force of law as in the zoning
Okay.
bylaw. That is to say that if, especially with the elements in the zoning bylaw that are law, such as having to break down massing and facades and the size of facades, if you're ever going to use this document as a way to help regulate that particular aspect, you want these to have some force of law to them. You're going to want to go through and adopt these as, call them guidelines, but really what you're doing is adopting them as a type of regulations, which you have the authority to do.
Okay,
Yeah, just like your,
okay, thank you.
yeah, just like your subdivision rules and regulations.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman. So, John, following up on that, who is responsible for, I was under the impression, I think the same as Dave, that these were guidelines that a builder or architect or developer would pick up in the building department when they come in to first inquire.
Yeah.
And so if we're now saying, well, they're more than just guidelines, they're enforceable regulations, who is the enforcer?
They're not enforceable regulations. What you do is, these are going to help you regulate development in the district, which is exactly why you had a zoning change right about the time I came on, which was a belt and suspenders approach authorizing this board to adopt guidelines.
See, my understanding is that the language of the district, this interprets the language of the district legislation or formula. So that when it says it has to be consonant with the ethos of the village, This is saying, well, if something's consonant with the ethos of the village, it means that it's got this kind of massing, these number of windows, this roof pitch. This is how you talk about consonance or consistency.
So if,
In other words, you wouldn't put up, like you could say, well, I want to put up a Ferrari red cinder block cube and sell pizzas. Well, there's no way you could argue that this is consistent with the language of the special district. Isn't that what?
Yeah, exactly. It helps clarify. You still need zoning that allows you to regulate specific things. But in trying to interpret, say, what does it mean to break down massing so it's consistent with the district? That sort of detail really isn't in the zoning. The guidelines are gonna help guide you implementing the zoning. They're not independently enforceable. It's not a design district, and it's not an historic district.
Right.
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
So, for example, perfect segue, in the guidelines, I believe it says, and I'm sorry, I don't have the page number, but when it talks about setbacks, it says 20 to 40 feet. Are the zoning guidelines gonna say it's 37 and a half? Or are they gonna say it's a minimum of 20 and a maximum of 40?
I'm happy you brought that up, because there's a provision with historic structures in the zoning that sometimes you can set the setback for an historic structure based on other surrounding setbacks. So in order to do that, you don't really have any guidance. This is the sort of guideline that may help you implement that provision in the zoning bylaw when you're deciding what an appropriate setback might be.
So the 20 to 40 guideline could be, in fact is, a guideline saying minimum and maximum.
Right, because there are some things that are, especially where you have a special permit in the district, that something's not just allowed as a matter of right. I imagine you might be, even though you don't have design review per se, if something is a special permit, you might be even looking at the guidelines to determine whether something is consistent with the special permit criteria that basically looks at, is the development compatible with neighboring development?
And the other thing is, when we did this, the inventory of every structure that's along the road, north and south side of 28, we did average, median, and mean setbacks for all 42 structures. So I think that was the bandwidth. That was in the language.
You have that.
So that's
for
on a
existing,
spreadsheet.
But if there was an empty field somewhere or a piece
Right.
of property that somebody wants to develop, they'd have to go back to the guideline. And if I understand correctly, that guideline, somebody decided 20 to 40 feet.
Right.
Because that was
Because
the
that's-
right number based on the ones that you
Right.
looked at. Okay.
The guidelines are going to be good for people who want to develop property, but it also is going to help the planning board support its decision-making, for or against, especially for certain projects.
Right.
90% of the time, probably doesn't matter. But those projects that are more controversial, these guidelines will help you support your decision-making.
Okay. The only, oh, I'm sorry, Mayor.
No, I guess the way I look at them is they're a supplement,
Yeah,
right? They supplement the
Supplement
zoning.
to the zoning.
So your zoning's your underlying law, and this gives you the right to kind of move back and forth. It gives you the ability to do kind of what we did with the building in Harwichport and the building in Harwich Center, with getting the streetscape and using the overlying district to get more of a streetscape on those new buildings along the sidewalk. This is going to allow you to kind of take that into consideration where we normally can't.
Right.
But here, the guideline gives us the ability to kind of reinforce that as a possibility to be in concert with the surrounding properties in the neighborhood.
I think it helps you negotiate too, but you're absolutely right. You can't pick these up and say, you have to build this building right here, or else you're gonna get denied. Absolutely right. That's not the purpose of these. Yeah, but where
And
you
the
have,
Same thing for what are we calling it? Reconstruction or rehab or repair?
yeah, well, historic structures versus new construction.
Yes, yes. My other, it's not so much a question, it's just a, maybe an item for discussion, and maybe it's because I'm looking at the thing not in total the way I should be. I understand what we're trying to do is preserve the architectural structures and everything that goes along with that. But are we pricing ourselves, are we pricing this work? Are the requirements we're imposing pricing the work that needs to be done to bring them up to code or up to meet our new requirements almost cost prohibitive? In other words, and I just look at this picture that Dave referenced, I don't know even what they're called, not finials, but the thing where he mentioned the lead paint, and it says we need to repair rather than place whenever possible and all that stuff. And I'm not a builder and I have no idea of pricing, but I would think something pre-made that you could, out of a composite material that looks exactly like that, would be a lot cheaper than having to use tight gray, although that's what we want to encourage, is the cost, the pricing so prohibitive that nobody's going to do it. Like, and I think of, what's the place that kind of started this whole thing? Captain Brooks, on the house on the corner of Depot and
Bill Parsonage for the
Parsonage.
Baptist.
Oh,
for the-
Captain Baker House.
Captain Baker.
And
thank
which,
you.
and that's a detail from the Captain Baker House.
Captain Baker. So, like, what is it gonna cost somebody to repair this, repair that building
Well, remember,
to all these things? And I
nothing
know,
in the,
sorry,
nothing in the
Mary's
legislation
chomping at the
says
bit.
you have to. I mean,
No.
right?
No, they're gonna have to do whatever they have to do regardless. I mean, if they're knocking this building down and there's lead paint on it, they still can't just knock it down. They've gotta do what they need to do to make sure that,
Oh,
that it's.
sure, absolutely.
So, I mean, I don't think our guidelines are imposing crazy costs. I think the structures themselves are going to have costs associated with them because of the age of the structure and what they are. So, I mean, there's added cost to demolishing a historic building, versus, you know,
Right.
something that was
But
built
this
2
isn't
years
like,
ago.
Yeah, I'm not
this isn't like a
advocating that.
mandate from a historic district. We're saying that you have to comply with, you know, substituting like for like and using historically approved colors and,
Yeah, I wasn't
This is
looking
just-
so much at the colors, but just reading this item and looking at those, what are they called, Bill?
Corbels.
The knees, if you wanna
Brackets.
call them that, but
Whatever.
they're available.
right?
You can buy it both composite and wood.
But that's exactly the point,
They're
Bill.
not
You're
expensive.
saying it's less expensive to go buy those rather than, yeah, I think
Have
that
somebody work a lathe
Right.
and all that?
those were the difficult questions that presumably were asked during the zoning,
Right.
you know.
Okay.
But
I'm reading.
remember, you're getting certain benefits by preserving the historic structure. So if you're agreeing to do that, you're probably preserving some of these other things. There's no absolute prohibition on demolition there.
Right.
So
We're
if-
just trying to raise the cost of thoughtless demolition. That's primarily the thing, is that people coming in
Okay.
here with
I
a,
see
like
what
an algorithmic approach toward the value of the street frontage of the property according to the number of cars. That's a different calculation
Right.
than shadows and history and, you know, it's like, there's a quantitative and a qualitative. We just want to reintroduce the qualitative factor. Even though there is going to be a, you know, an economic thing, it's a
Yeah.
qualitative quality of life thing, I think, that.
But if you're looking across the table from that permittee, you can't tell them, you have to do this,
Right.
Right.
The guidelines. You have to adhere to the zoning.
right? But if you have a major project and it's a discretionary project and you want to use these guidelines to help analyze the project in terms of the special
Do your
permit
cost-benefit
criteria.
analysis.
Yeah, you know, once you have the discretion to do that, there are some negotiated items too.
And we could use these then in our negotiation, putting conditions on relating back
Yes.
to this.
Because again, correct me if
May
I'm
I add
wrong,
something?
unlike a historic district where you have a little more teeth to be able to deal with aesthetics and the things. Doesn't rise to the level of a historic district.
No.
Sarah, I don't want to subject you to our further internal confabulations here. I want to thank you. Did you have further reflections on the process or the document?
Well, thanks. I guess I just wanted to add one thing related to the discussion you were just having, and that I really see the guidelines as an opportunity to educate folks.
Right.
So you may have developers out there who have, or even just property owners who have no experience working with historic properties. And I'd like to think that by showing them these guidelines, they will learn a little bit about why historic properties are valued and why there might be a reason to retain the existing architectural trim rather than replace it and things like that. So I think it's a nice opportunity to convey the value of historic properties in a non-regulatory way.
Agreed, and thank you. And I would just add, as a rider, I think it's already working insofar as we've had two businesses essentially anchor their business plan on the concept that this is kind of like a informal historic area. The Captain Uriel Doan House has been opened up as a B&B, and it's going to have that, go back to that, original story. And then the Job Chase Jr. House / Irish Pub, recast as the Captain Chase House, Summer House. So those are two. So we're on our way, at least. This will help. Thank you so much, Sarah. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. And I'll look forward to seeing the sort of collection of recommendations and suggestions you have. I'll expect to get that from John, and we'll go from there.
Thanks very much. Have a great evening, and thank Liz.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I think the next item on our agenda are the minutes, which were, again, immaculately presented, and I'll entertain a motion to accept or
I-
change.
I had one
or-
question.
Yes.
So under the public hearing, the first public hearing,
Yes.
you as having made the motion.
I had a question about that, too.
Yeah, because I didn't
think I
think
could.
you did.
I didn't think I could. So,
Yeah,
I think I did it when it
Yeah,
came
we
on.
did. I remember.
But that's just one
That's
thing
right.
that I'd check.
okay.
Okay, so let's
on
get to,
page 2 of the minutes, there's a typo at the bottom.
okay. David, maybe we could deal with, so what needs to be changed?
So on page 2, under the public hearing for Aaron Gingris's
Okay.
withdrawal without prejudice, the minutes say that, that the chair
I see.
made
Okay.
the motion.
Okay.
I thought I had, but
Okay, okay, we'll correct that.
And John, I think I have one as well.
Okay,
Page 1, about halfway down,
okay.
under public hearing. Mike London, Executive Director, Conservation Trust.
Oh.
Or should that be Michael Lack?
Yeah, funny thing, Mike London was the owner of the property.
Property,
yeah. Right.
Block, yeah.
Okay.
You're right, good catch. Okay. Yeah, we'll correct that,
there was also, the chair is having made a motion on that to endorse the plan.
okay.
And I wasn't here for that portion of the meeting, he may
Okay.
have. I
Okay.
just usually
Right.
wonder, because usually don't.
Yeah,
So-
I mean, we don't have formal rules that would prohibit you from making a
No.
motion.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes, like Robert's rules, you typically don't do that, but we haven't even adopted Robert's.
Right.
rules. That's the procedure.
I think it's kind of in extremis. I'll do that, so, but,
And we had that sort of meeting.
right.
You
That's
did.
exactly right. That's exactly right.
Yeah, my apologies.
And
Well,
and
we
I do,
appreciate your duress for the evening, so that you made it in.
It was
We're
fine.
obliged,
It was
much
fine.
obliged.
I think David maybe had some changes as well.
Yes, Dave. There was you said there was a typo on the bottom of page 2?
Yeah, it's the one about with, should have said without, said with.
Oh, yeah, it should say without prejudice. That's correct. The
Or
motion.
Mr. Berry moved
yeah.
to,
Oh, yeah, okay, I
Yeah.
got
say
it.
Without.
Okay,
Yeah.
I missed the important part of the motion.
So I guess we will approve the minutes as amended the next time through. Okay? And item number
You can't do it
D
now?
is any correspondence or briefings or advisory opinions? Nothing from,
Yeah,
Sure.
the zoning board of appeals agenda is not out yet, and historic agenda is not out yet.
okay.
So can we just go back to so did you not approve the
Sounds
We
like,
can,
Yeah, you can
we
approve the
can make the
minutes.
minutes approved.
Yeah, you can
So
approve.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes as amended by discussion.
Yeah.
Second?
all in favor? Oh, well,
call.
let's roll call. Mr. Stoltz,
Bill Stoltz, aye.
Ms. Maslowski,
Mary Maslowski, aye.
Mr. Chadwick,
Craig Chadwick, aye.
Mr. Harris,
David Harris, aye.
Mr. Berry, aye. Okay.
And who was the second on that, Chip?
I guess.
I think
You
Craig.
did,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, well, I will send you an email with some of my edits. I'm sure there'll be other edits. If you do, just send it to John, and we'll get that to Sarah and Liz, and they can make the switches. I'm happy to do pictures on the fly, now that
Okay.
we're getting some good weather, and
Okay.
that's important too, so.
So I apologize about that confusion with the process for adoption but, I mean, I guess my thinking too is, why would you ever have changed the zoning to authorize the committee to do guidelines if they weren't gonna have some force to them? Because of course you just could have done that.
I'm trying to remember, wasn't there something where we agreed to adopt guidelines at a town meeting like 2 years ago? Wasn't that part of the package?
No, that's what I'm talking
Right.
about. So
Yeah,
the
like-
zoning was changed to authorize, actually to
Correct.
Authorize
mandate,
it,
Right.
to mandate the board to do guidelines.
To adopt guidelines,
And we were
right.
under a time crunch, if memory serves, that we needed to get that done within a year.
Right.
And we,
Well,
if I remember correctly.
yeah. But of course, if they weren't gonna have any force or relevance to them other than best practices, why would you have ever
Why
changed your
bother?
zoning?
Right.
Yeah.
So,
But I think
It's
we
always
had
a
a
lot
good
more fun
discussion.
telling people what to do than asking them to do it, right?
I think they're gonna be used, for general purposes, and they're actually good village guidelines.
yeah.
So there's a bunch of villages throughout the town that you could pretty much pick these up and say, these are good design practices in villages. But, in the regulatory sense, it's just gonna help you make your sound decisions and negotiate. But they're not hard and fast rules that you're gonna say you have to do this.
And I think the real value, again, as Sarah said, is gonna be to help people that are property owners to understand their own best practices, look at their own property with some creativity.
Yeah.
So,
And it should add value to the properties too. It's so that, you're not destroying the value
right.
that's inherent in those historic structures.
But don't sand down that lead paint, just paint over it.
Right,
Right?
Don't get got.
sandblast.
That's something you can use your old respirators for.
There's a new program on HGTV. It's old houses worth restoring. It's come out-
Interesting.
Came out in the last 2 months.
There's a program, I think it's on Netflix, although I could be wrong, could be HGTV. It's a group based in Plymouth. And they're doing a bunch of old homes, like pre-1800 homes.
This is
and
probably the same program.
Could be, yeah.
Yeah.
And they've got a little shop,
Yeah, so they've done one on the Cape,
yeah,
one in Plimpton, one in Plymouth,
right.
I think one in Middleborough, but it's all surrounded.
And they
area.
turn everything into like a Texas farmhouse inside, right?
No, they restore them like they're
No, but I
supposed to
mean,
be,
the interior design aesthetic is like the same on every HGTV thing. It's like you
Oh,
close your
yeah.
eyes, inside it's like sliding barn door and like, open
But no,
kitchen.
they actually saved the frames and all that.
Right.
It was an interesting program.
Can I just ask a question?
Yes.
What are we thinking for like public hearing? Would we think we would have one by, say, I think April's probably tight, being that we're in March, but probably May or June, we could have a public hearing and get them,
I think we could have this in April. I don't
Do
think
you?
there's a heck of a
Okay.
lot that has to get done.
okay,
No.
good.
I mean, it's up to getting some comments to Sarah, and if we want to replace some of the pictures, get different pictures.
Great.
Yeah.
Have we
So
got-
I gotta
It'd
get
be nice
Elaine
to
to
get
send me the schedule again, because she keeps
Okay.
sending me snippets, like the ones that are
Oh.
the online schedule. It's like,
Okay.
I need the overall
We'll
somehow.
send the real schedule, I don't
The
know
real
why.
schedule that's
Yeah.
the spreadsheet, somehow I can't,
Okay,
it
Yeah,
fell
we'll
through the
It's not just
crack.
on the, it's not just on the page?
It should be on the page, but I was hoping to get the spreadsheet so I could cut and paste and just
Okay,
get it into my calendar so I
spreadsheet.
get the alarms and all that crap.
okay. Spreadsheet for it, okay.
Have we had any new applicants for the planning board?
I don't want to get into that.
I was gonna say, that's a hot potato.
Yeah,
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 Is it?
that's the elephant in the room.
yes. Yeah,
That's a selectmen's issue, I
that's
guess.
selectmen's issue.
Was a decision made?
No, not yet. Yep. The other thing I did suggest, so, just so you know, is the idea that under the charter and under state law, planning board can have anywhere between 5 and 9 members.
Right.
A couple of years ago, the charter was amended to effectively say, here's the limit, and you actually set the number of members in a general bylaw in the code for any board. So I suggested, we are having a problem with quorum. Several years ago, and Bill remembers this, the planning board was 9. And
Right.
it went down to 7. Most, boards now are 5.
We were, we were, 9 full-time members,
At one time, yeah,
and I think we had 2 alternates,
yeah.
or 3, I forget
Yeah.
which.
But I would definitely resist us going down below 5. I
Oh, we
think
You
could.
can't.
it
So,
just-
so you can't,
You
yeah.
can't. It's state
Wasn't
law.
there, didn't I overhear some discussion about taking it to 3 or something like that? No. Or
What
back
people
room
say out
breeding.
there. No,
State
but-
law,
Okay,
the
all right.
charter reiterates state law that says between 5 and 9.
Okay,
And the
No
value
more-
is.
No
the
less
sup-
than 5.
Yeah, and the value is the supermajority,
right.
right? So, because sometimes the supermajority sets what your quorum is for special permit matters.
Right. Right.
I don't think going below 5 would do any good for the town.
No, but you can't, you can't.
Can't anyway.
You can't,
It's a moot point.
Right.
It's state law.
Yeah.
That's a minimum requirement.
yeah. So there's something to be said there, but that's a decision, I mentioned that might be a possibility. That's a decision, I think, that lies with the selectmen.
Right.
Doesn't that eventually have to go to the annual town meeting?
Absolutely, it's a bylaw change.
It's a bylaw change.
Yeah.
Even though it says 5 to 9.
Well, the charter
7
says
now,
5 to
and-
9, then the bylaw sets the number of members.
Right.
If you want to set the number of members between 5 and 9, you have to change the bylaws,
Okay.
rather than changing. The thinking was, you don't have to go back and change your charter all the time then.
So if we went from 7 to 5,
That's a bylaw change, not a charter change.
quorum would be,
A quorum for a subdivision matter would be 3.
3.
A quorum for a special permit matter, supermajority, would be 4. Versus, right now, we need 5.
5 of 7.
Yeah.
I just think we have better conversations when we have more people. And I think it benefits the public to have more ideas circulating, even if it means that meetings take a little bit longer.
I think it does too, if you can attract those 7 people.
I just can't imagine why we can't,
It's a problem all over town with it.
yeah. Is it Harwich or is it alone or is it
Everywhere.
everywhere?
It's everywhere.
Everywhere.
You
Yeah.
think it's a COVID thing that's people
No,
are
it's-
just timid or just apathy?
Well, it's always been because a lot of the members want to go away,
Right,
a lot of us are retired,
right.
and they want to go down south, and so then you don't have the members to make the quota.
You also want to look at it that you don't want to have matters that you don't act on and that are constructively approved because you don't have a
Right.
quorum at a meeting.
Right,
So, if your quorum is 3 and 4, means you can actually get the work done
right.
and get the approvals or the denials or whatever it is and actually conduct your work. It's better than, in my own opinion, than skipping a meeting and losing out on a project because you didn't get a quorum.
Right.
I mean, we have had quorum problems on historic since I've been on historic. We've now gotten better, but, there are some times, those school vacation week
Right.
timeframes, those months when people go to Florida for extended periods of time, where you don't get a quorum and then something gets constructively approved because you
The
can't get
full-
5 people, or you can't get 4 people at a meeting, so
Right.
there's that way to think of it too. I mean, it's sometimes the practical standpoint is, I'd rather conduct business than not.
But to answer your question, we're gonna have to go talk to Robert Putnam, a sociologist up at Harvard, and ask him why,
Yeah,
who studies, enemy and,
right. Disenchantment of the bourgeoisie, right?
Yeah.
We, the planning board, haven't had that many, I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, since I've been on board, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, where we haven't been able to hold a meeting due to lack of quorum. Maybe, I think, I can
We had
remember
2
maybe
in
2 or
January.
2. But we lost a member due to death.
That's true.
We lost Alan moved out of town.
Moving, right.
And an alternate moved out of town.
Right.
We had
So-
three hammers and
So
dropped. and
up until that time,
Right,
like I said, since I've been on, I think 3
We're
years
getting a
or
lot
whatever,
done.
I think we've been okay, so.
and thankfully, we haven't had the kind of schedule that we were having, like in
Yeah.
2019, 2018. We were having like
Hammer.
5 or 6 hearings per meeting.
Well,
I
we
think we
were-
did 50 projects in 2019 or 2018.
If you look back, I would say that we did have problems with quorums on a few occasions on reschedules, that we had to make sure that people were gonna be around. I mean, I'm going back to 2016,
Yeah,
you know, and, it just happens.
right.
it's an important discussion to have, and it goes beyond the planning board, and it's a discussion I think the selectmen need to have up and down all the different committees they have, and looking at all their vacancies.
Right.
So I didn't mean to bring it up as much as a planning board matter, the selectmen, other than to tell them, this is why there was a change from the charter to the general bylaw, so there could be more agility in setting the actual quorum for that board and committee.
Right.
So I imagine, and this was only 2018, 2017 when that change was made, so there was there's an implicit recognition then that there
Right.
was a quorum problem up and down the variety of boards and committees the town has.
Yeah, and you mentioned a little while ago that in April, there is a change as to whether or not someone participating remotely can count as a quorum. Could you explain that?
Yeah, well, as of right now, I mean, Mary probably as a town clerk knows more than I do, but there were temporary rules in place for COVID, and those are set to expire in April. Right now, there's almost like a right to have a board member participate remotely and have them count towards quorum. But basically, what's set to expire in April are those COVID-specific rules, going back to the open meeting law rules that existed prior to the COVID times, where, of course, you could participate remotely, but in order to count towards quorum, you needed a physical quorum present.
Right.
You had to have a quorum in the
Okay.
room
Right.
in order to open the meeting. So if we had 4 people in the room and you were remote, we wouldn't have a quorum under the old rules, and under the rules that should restart April 15th.
Yeah.
So unless some other moratorium is put in place and they extend it.
What's the reasoning? Have you
The-
heard, what is the reasoning?
Because
In the
that's
quorum
the way the open meeting law works. It's a quorum, you have to have a quorum physically in the room. I mean, remote participation
What is it?
and participation by
How
telephone
many do we
is
need
a
for
relatively
quorum?
new thing for,
Yeah.
during my tenure as a municipal professional.
I think David had some comments.
How many is needed for a quorum for different actions?
For us, it's 5, right?
5 and 4. 4, because there is a regular membership of 7, even if some of those positions aren't filled. Subdivision is 4 and special permits are 5. That's the quorum.
So if we have a special permit application between April and when I get back sometime in May, you won't be able, you won't have a quorum.
Correct.
That's correct.
Oh.
So please keep us apprised on your flight schedule.
But with the price of gas, I may not be able to afford to get back.
There you go.
Got that right.
All right, well, thank you all for attending this evening. Are there any further business?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Uh, Mr. Stoltz?
Aye.
Ms. Maslowski?
Mary Maslowski, aye.
Mr. Chadwick?
Fred Chadwick, aye.
Mr. Harris?
David Harris, aye.
Duncan Berry, aye. I'm going to do this.